The Arizona Cardinals were definitely a surprise team in 2013 because even as the season was going along, this looked like a team that had some of the nice pieces in place that you would need, but they weren't quite ready for prime time yet. Then the second half of the season happened, and the Arizona Cardinals really started cooking. They handed the Seahawks their only loss at Quest Field all year. The Cardinals ended up finishing 10-6, third place in the NFC West, and unfortunately, they just missed out on the playoffs. That's got to be heartbreaking because most years you assume winning 10 games is enough to get you into the playoffs. Well, in 2013, it just didn't happen to be the case for the Arizona Cardinals, but nonetheless, a really, really good season for them. And they've got a lot of momentum, you would think, in theory, heading into 2014. Now, they were busy this offseason making some moves. They brought in Antonio Cromartie, Ted Ginn Jr., their big free agent signing Jared Veld here, the left tackle from the Oakland Raiders. They also went into the draft and they got some guys such as a Dayon Buchanan and even maybe a John Brown, who you expect to be an impact player in the return game from them. They also get the addition of their first round pick from last year, Jonathan Cooper, who missed pretty much all of the season with injury. So it's like you get a whole extra first round pick that you didn't have available to you last year. The Cardinals didn't suffer a lot of debilitating losses in the offseason. Carlos Dansby went where the money was and left at free agency, as did Anton Kaysen, as did Andre Roberts. Perhaps the most debilitating loss for the Cardinals in 2014 is going to be the loss of inside linebacker Darrell Washington due to a drug suspension for the entire 2014 season. Some losses, but nothing that should be too incredibly debilitating. Now, looking ahead to this season, some of the strengths I see for the Arizona Cardinals, I look at their secondary. You're talking about Patrick Peterson, one of the very best corners in all the National Football League. Now you pair him with Antonio Cromartie. You brought in Dayon Buchanan to pair him with Tyrann Mathieu. That's a very impressive and largely young secondary, the type of secondary that most NFL franchises would love to have. I also like some of the skill players that the Arizona Cardinals have. You've got Larry Fitzgerald, obviously. Not quite the same player he once was, but still, he's Larry Fitzgerald. Michael Floyd, I think, had a very nice second season last year, and he's a guy that I expect to grow as he heads into year 3 of his career. Now you've got guys in there like a Ted Ginn Jr., who had a nice season in Carolina last year. Andre Ellington at running back, a guy who I thought was criminally underused in the early portion and pretty much all throughout the season by head coach Bruce Arians in that Cardinals offense. You spend a second-round pick on Troy Nicholas, the tight end I really like out of Notre Dame. There are a lot of skill players for quarterback Carson Palmer to work with, and I think that's actually a surprising strength for this team. And in general, their defense is still pretty strong. I have some concerns about the linebacking core, and I'll talk about that in a moment. But this is still a really, really good defense, and you wouldn't expect them to drop off the face of the earth in 2014. But I do have some question marks about this team. Carson Palmer, he wasn't the greatest in 2013. Now he's going to be another year older, and it almost feels like what the Cardinals got out of him in 2013 was the best that they're going to get. And I don't think it's going to get any better, nor do I expect him to play exactly the same. And what happens if Carson Palmer gets hurt? Are they going to go to Logan Thomas? What happens if Carson Palmer is ineffective? Is there really an effective alternative behind him that could come in and win some games for the Cardinals? That's a huge question mark to me, is that quarterback position, the most important position in pro football, and it's a big question mark for the Cardinals heading into 2014. I expect them to be improved on the offensive line, but it remains to be seen just how improved they're going to be because, again, they need to keep Carson Palmer upright. They need to keep him healthy. They need to open up holes in the running game. And yes, you've got your last year's first-round pick, Jonathan Cooper, coming back into the fold. You brought in Jared Veld here via free agency. I expect them to be improved, but how much they're going to be improved remains to be seen. And will they be a strength of this team, or would they just be a slightly smaller weakness compared to years past? And then I have concerns about their inside linebacking because you're talking about a team that last year had Darrell Washington and Carlos Dansby starting on the inside. Now Carlos Dansby's left via free agency. Darrell Washington is suspended for the entire season. Now you're looking at, last year's mid-round pick Kevin Minter having to step into the fold and play big right away. That was a big part of the success of that Cardinals defense last season was the play of their linebackers, in particular on the inside with Washington and Dansby, and now both of those guys are gone for all of 2014. That's a huge question mark for this Cardinals defense and this Cardinals roster. Looking at their schedule, they've got the AFC West, the NFC East, then their NFC conference games outside of their division in the East. You've got Detroit and Atlanta. So it's not a brutal road to hoe by any stretch of the imagination for the Cardinals. Uh, Key games, I guess you would say, to look out for, a key stretch of schedule would be the last 3 weeks of the season because the Cardinals go to St. Louis, then host Seattle, then they go to San Francisco. So the last 3 weeks of the season, they're all playing against NFC West opponents. And if the Cardinals are in any position at all for the playoffs or maybe the divisional race heading into those last 3 weeks, it's those last 3 weeks that are going to determine their fate. It's those last 3 weeks that are going to determine whether they're a playoff team or whether they're going to be on the outside looking in. Now, the keys to their success, first and foremost, Carson Palmer's got to play and play all year. He's got to stay healthy. This defense has to play like a top five defense. They've got to overcome some of the losses on the inside of their linebacking core. They need that secondary to play like an elite secondary unit, like it has the potential to be. And they need those skill position players to step up and provide more punch and more explosiveness in that Cardinals offensive attack. When I look at 2014, I see the Arizona Cardinals, and I understand why a lot of people anticipate this organization improving and getting better and doing more in 2014. But I don't personally see it. I kind of get this vibe that the second half of last season, the Cardinals, frankly, played a little bit above themselves, and I expect them to come a little bit back down to earth in 2014 because let's be realistic. Somebody's got to finish last place in the NFC West, which most people would agree is the toughest division in the National Football League, whereas a few years ago it was the weakest and most pathetic. But now it's the strongest. Somebody's got to finish last. And I look at some of the key indicators, such as Carson Palmer in his age, the questions on the inside of that linebacking core, the questions about the offensive line, the questions about the running game outside of Andre Ellington. What else are they going to get? And I see a Cardinals team that playing in that division, they could still be a solid team that could beat anybody in a week in, week out basis, but I see them struggling at times, and I see them getting kind of left out of the cold and getting lost in the shuffle. So I anticipate them probably finishing somewhere around 6-10, more so maybe 7-9, and bringing up the rear in the NFC West. My opinion, I know, blast away at me and tell me how stupid I am, and then come back at the end of the season when I'm right, and then don't ever acknowledge it at all.